that black people ought not to be let out of jail. I'm sure that's not why the Bush campaign put that commercial on television. Trump is voicing, and what's difficult to know here, truly, is whether or not he's doing it as part of his mockery, or whether or not he's entirely sincere. For my purposes in this debate, it actually doesn't matter whether or not he's doing it to mock. And who's he mocking? Who's he mocking by calling out Mexican Americans? We have a group located here in Southern California called the Minutemen, for goodness sake, who run people for public office, saying far worse things about Mexican Americans coming here than Trump has said to date. So the fact that he's prepared to say what the Republicans have hidden in symbols and code and cachet, frankly, I think is a tribute to his willingness to take the heat from saying it. And he's certainly taken a lot of heat from it. And the fact that those people are energized is a good thing too. That's part of the beneficial side effect of the anti-Trump reaction to the Trump campaign. More people energized, the better. Pardon me, but I thought that's what democracy was all about.
Is that a question for Professor Petrarca?
It's a question for both.
Okay, I'll take it.
If the majority of the society is racist, is it democratically necessary and good for democracy to elect a racist representative?
The majority of society is racist. Is it good for democracy? Well, if it's, I mean, good is a normative consideration. I don't know if you're saying, is it possible that such a thing like that could happen? Is it possible that the country could elect a racist as president of the United States?
I'm not asking the question.
We've had them. We've had plenty of them. Okay? So it would hardly be something it's not a place we haven't been before. Is it going to happen this time? I don't have a clue. Is Donald Trump racist? Yes. You can judge whether or not he is, but to make such a judgment, you have to be prepared to make an argument about his motivation. Is he motivated by something that he feels inside of him, or is he motivated, and I'm not bothered by this as much as Professor Schoenfeld apparently is, by his enormous ego? Look, folks, we live in a place where if academic brains were helium balloons, we'd all be spending all of our time looking up in the air. I mean, universities have enormous amounts of ego in them. And so the fact that Trump is egoistic hardly phases me at all. But I'm not prepared to judge his motivation. As I said before, it's also not necessary for me to judge his motivation for the purposes of making an argument about the campaign. I'm not going to go down the road that Professor Schoenfeld has accused Donald Trump of going down, which is to make the ad hominem remark. I'm not going to say anything ad hominem about Donald Trump. And by the way, on that point, if I can, I do think there is a line that Trump would not cross, and he hasn't crossed yet. I'm not bothered by him calling out other adults who are running for president of the United States. Where he seems to have drawn the line, at the very least, is he's not going to attack anybody's family, unless they've also held public office. Let's think of who that might be. He's not going to attack anybody's children. If he crosses that boundary, then I think we have a much more serious problem than we have with him making off-cuff comments about Rand Paul. But we had an off-cuff comment about Rand Paul already by my colleague, and you all giggled because you thought it was funny to speculate about whether or not that was his first or last name. Haha, feel bad about yourself later on.
Of course, we've hated racists elected, especially when people of color did not vote. I mean, one of the things that facilitates those outcomes is the shape of the electorate. And a quality that's been characteristic of the United States for a long time now is a constant enlargement of the electorate to be coincident with the entire population. in that setting, the exclusion of particular groups, I find unacceptable. And I find someone who speaks in those terms to be unacceptable. As far as the ego issue is concerned, most people have an ego. According to Freud, we all have egos. So talking about ego doesn't mean anything. But there is something about people seeking high levels of position are expected to behave with a certain dignity. This man doesn't. And that's unacceptable. And part of that expected dignity is you don't say this sort of totally self-serving, wild things. It's ludicrous. I could go on, but it's just being repetitive. So I'd rather have another question.
Thank you. Question, I guess, for Professor Schoenfeld. Is that, which one? Oh, I'm sorry, between the two of you. I was thinking further back. Yeah.
So you were saying, you were talking about dignity. What does it say of the American public, politically aware public, and has so much support? What does that say about their dignity?
Well, I think the following is true. You can always appeal to people's prurient interests. You can always appeal to the worst within us. Okay? And some of us will go in that direction, not necessarily forever, but for a certain amount of time. I don't think Americans are particularly different from anyone else on that, any other group, any other population group on that dimension. What's special here is having a contender for the highest office, talking explicitly in those terms. Now, Professor Petrarca seems to find that to be positive for the democratic process. I don't. And one of the reasons that I don't is I think every one of us, even you, have inside of you the capacity to do bad things. And one of the things about role models is to discourage that, not to encourage it. So that's just where and if you wonder if I'm correct, Stanley Milgram, the great social psychologist, did a fascinating set of experiments on obedience. And he did it after World War II. His big question was, look, only the Germans could have done this mass extermination of people. And so Milgram, who at the time was a professor at Yale, started to do obedience experiments with Yale undergraduates. I mean, talk about wonderful people. And he constructed an experiment which I will not describe, but its conclusion was 3/4 of the population would be willing to shock someone else to death. So, hey, the Nazis weren't special. It was the context who enabled and pushed them to behave that way. Well, you're not special either, and I'm not special. And it's the context. And our context has not had, since we've been an inclusive society, because I remember in the days of Lincoln, it wasn't this way. We haven't had that, and I think that's bad for our democratic process.
Thank you. Question for Professor Petrarca. Sir.
Perception of Congress is in the toilet, as everybody knows, because they're being controlled by a handful of billionaires. Now, Trump is funding his own campaign, and does that make him perceived as more trustworthy?
If you look at the opinion poll, the answer to that question is easy. Yes. And let me give you a couple of examples where it's taken an American president with exactly the qualities that would predict against their behavior to perform a behavior that nobody else had been prepared to undertake. People elected Eisenhower to be president of the United States because he promised what? To end the war in Korea. We elected a warrior to end a war. People expected that Johnson, as a Southern Democrat, would never support civil rights. But it took Johnson to promote the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It took Nixon, who cut his teeth attacking and chewing up communists and seeing communists everywhere, including right here where we're at, when he was running for elective office from California. It took Nixon, the anti-communist, the tried and true anti-red, to open up relationships with the People's Republic of China. It took Jimmy Carter, a Southern Democrat, to undo welfare in this country as we knew it prior to welfare reform. It may take a billionaire oligarch to undo the oligarchy.
Question for Professor Schoenfeld. Sir.
I think one of the most chilling things that many people have seen when they look at the Trump campaign is that it's more of a caricature of the other campaigns than its own separate entity. And so I would say that one of the things that the Trump campaign has been able to do is to turn a mirror on the political process as more of a game to win than more of a than the process I think that we would like. And so wouldn't you say that the Trump campaign in its ability to turn a mirror on this process may be as helpful as the civil rights movement was in turning a mirror on the de facto South?
Well, your attempt to link Trump and Martin Luther King is almost Petrockian. I must say, I see those things as very, very different. I mean, first of all, some of this issue about what does it mean to quote unquote be an oligarch in this position, which Professor Petrarca indicated. And there's no question whatsoever that people who are worth billions of dollars tend to weigh more than people who are worth $100,000, who tend to weigh more than people who are worth $10,000. Okay, all of that is true. But if, for example, if we look back in 2008 campaign, where the Republican oligarchs came to support Sarah Palin and John McCain, while the good people supported Barack Obama, the realities in terms of campaign finance was that Barack Obama single-handedly destroyed the most important law in the history of the United States, controlling political contributions, which was McCain-Feingold law passed by the U.S. Congress. And Obama overthrew it he refused to follow the law because he knew, and he did collect so much more money than McCain. And it's not just that he collected $5 from little elderly ladies in, downtown Santa Ana. He was collecting big money from big donors. And the reality is that just like the population itself tends to be split between the Republicans and Democrats, so are the oligarchs. So I'd like to see a lot less money in American politics, just as I think most of us would, for many reasons. But I don't think Trump is, or his candidacy, doing anything. Quite to the contrary, he's saying, if the Democrats want to win, bring in Bill Gates. He's got more money than Trump. He'd be a great president. Stupid. I mean, this is not throwing a mirror on anything. The civil rights movement was a whole different level of phenomenon. This is crap.